So thank you very much. I would like to really talk about AI and its governance. Now, I'm going to talk about something that I think is missing in the governance of AI. That is the mathematical problems, because AI is fundamentally based in some form of mathematics. But those mathematics have severe implications on the governance of AI. I mentioned the name of a social media company. I was not supposed to mention it, I went to ChatGPT and I asked it a very simple question. Tell who is Tshilidzi Marwala. And by the way, this is my grandmother. And then ChatGPT confidently, and I want you to underline that concept of confidently. It confidently responded, Tshilidzi Marwala is the wife of Professor Tshilidzi Marwala. So I come from South Africa. If you mistake a grandmother for a wife, it is considered very, very rude. So ChatGPT was actually being rude, but most importantly, it was confidently rude without giving me confidence intervals. And I will talk about why this is the case. So what is wrong with the answer? Actually, there is only one word that is wrong in that statement. It's wife. Wife was supposed to be grandmother. Now, if we are just to go and check the accuracy of that statement, and the way we did the accuracy of that statement was we turned it into the digital numbers, ones and zeros. And the ones and zeros that represented wife instead of grandmother is really what is wrong. And we calculated the accuracy of this statement. And we found out that actually it is 89% accurate, yet it is false. And one conclusion that we came up with is that actually accuracy is not truth. For those of us who study statistics, we know the famous statement, correlation is not causation. Almost similar concept. Accuracy is not truth. And the reason for that is, part of the reason for that is that accuracy is normally continuous. In fact, if you are using AI, accuracy is, certainly machine learning, accuracy is what you derive from doing some operations in the continuous space. Whereas truth is actually discrete. It's either true or false, and that's the end of it. And of course, deep learning is based on differential calculus. In fact, when you are training it, you need to calculate the derivative of your error with respect to your weights, which you can only do, and this is calculus 101. You can only differentiate a function if it is continuous. I hope those of you who studied mathematical calculus, you have not forgotten that very important thing. And that transformation from continuous to discrete space, which is the last step, and in many times is based on rounding of concept. And in this case, it is inherently false. And why does it think that Tshilidzi Marwala is my wife? Actually, the reason is very, very simple. If you go to the digital database and you just study the instances where two people are being related to one another, you will actually find that there is far more cases of husband and wives being related to one another than grandson and grandmother. In fact, I went and did a study. If the back you go, if it is just one grand, maybe. If it is great-grand, less maybe. If it is great-great-grand, now it becomes impossible. If it is, I think, 4, I could only find one case. And I did this study. And that was the relationship between George Boole, the person who invented Boolean algebra, and Jeff Hinton, it's a descendant, And of course here, there is a very important thing that for anybody to be related to his great-great-great-great-grand ancestor, both of them have to be famous. Otherwise, they are not going to be there. And because of that, and because of the fact that the training process in machine learning is based on the principles of maximum likelihood, then it will automatically assume that 2 people who are being related to each other are probably, most possibly, husband and wife than grandmother and grandson. And that is basically the reason why it said Tshilidzi Marwala is the grandson of, is the husband of Chanyo Marwala. The second aspect, and yesterday I was talking to Philippe, the chair of the advisory board of UNU Macau, and he was telling us that Chris Bishop has written a book with his son. Interesting. Says he does not cover anything about Bayesian learning, which was quite interesting. I still believe that the idea of giving confidence intervals to your answers is actually an important issue. And the only way you can be able to do that, or the best way in which you can be able to do that, is actually by using the Bayesian framework. So it was confident in its answer without giving us confidence intervals, because it is using what in statistics we call frequentist approach rather than Bayesian approach. I think this is actually quite important. And of course, from a policy perspective, there are actually instances, and I will give you one example, in medical diagnosis. There are instances where the confidence of the outcome of an AI process is actually quite an important factor, because there is life and death circumstances. But for large language models, maybe, and this is not how we even speak, if somebody asks you, how do I go to, I don't know, one of the casinos here, you are not going to give a direction and say, but I am 90% confident of this direction. Human beings just don't do that. And that is why in language models, the issue of confidence intervals is not even in the picture. But for some applications, medical, where time is not critical, so I would say AI must always give confidence intervals unless the application is not time critical. If it is a controller in an aircraft, maybe time is too critical for you to worry about the confidence intervals. Now, all these things that I have just highlighted actually tells us that AI must be governed. Now, the first question that I would ask is, if we have to govern this AI system, on what basis do we govern it? I am a UN official, so I would say, well, you have to govern it using UN documents. I even have 2 documents that should guide the governance. is the Declaration of Human Rights and the principles that are in the UN Charter. But people have derived various things that are important when you govern AI. People will tell you AI must be transparent. Yes, if you apply for a loan from a bank and you are denied a loan, maybe the bank owes you some form of explanation. If you are using it in our courtrooms, Fernando was telling me that in Brazil they are actually exploring that. Maybe you need to explain why a certain decision has been reached simply because courts have to explain themselves. It should be truthful, and we saw that it was not truthful. It gave us a false yet with good accuracy statement. It should be safe. It should respect privacy. It should be inclusive, and so on and so on. So these are the principles that everybody talks about. And we have looked at many of the governance frameworks that have been proposed, and all of them have elements of this in their things. However, there is a problem. The problem is that you cannot get one value sometimes without compromising another value. And one of these is truth, which is accuracy versus transparency. We all know that machine learning is relatively very, very accurate, but it is not transparent. You cannot be able to interpret it. And if we have to go back to the past, if you use fuzzy logic, you probably can explain what it says, but it is not accurate. So your choice, if you want transparency, sometimes you have to sacrifice truth. You have to simplify models so that you can be able to read what is inside it. Another one is safety. If you make your AI system transparent, everybody can see the weights, maybe it is not safe anymore because your hackers can understand your system much, much better. But if you make it too secure, it's not going to be transparent. Now the question is, how do you make these choices? And for me, it's very simple. I will go back to the principles of optimization. In optimization, you have this concept of multi-objective optimization. Multi-objective optimization, for me, this is just my views. I think Mr. Pareto actually described it very, very well. Where he says that, look, you need to have this curve which explains the optimal frontier, depending on the choices you make, whether, ranging from having, if it is a two-objective problem, 0 to one objective, 100 to another, all the way to the other way round. But where you are on that optimal frontier is actually a representation of your value. I'll give you an example. In the European Union, they have adopted something called the GDPR. And many people think it is too restrictive. I don't think so, but many people think it is too restrictive, Some people think it stifles innovation. If you go to Silicon Valley, everybody is worried about profit maximization. It's almost two opposite ends. Where you are on that frontier, whether you are risk-averse or opportunity-seeking, is a representation of your values. And of course, for us, we say it is a balancing act. And for us, we go back to those two documents that I talked about, the violation of the UN Charter and the violation of the Declaration of Human Rights, in order to find out where you are in that Pareto optimal frontier. So we need to govern this technology, but to govern it, we need to change human beings. And I'm not a big fan of social engineering. You need to change the behavior of human beings. And when we talk about behavior, the issues of behavioral psychology comes into the fore. And as an educator, the best way of changing the behavior of people is through education. It is clear now for AI that one of the mechanisms that we need to implement is the issue of AI literacy. People must be literate in AI. That's one way in which you can change human behavior for the users, certainly, so that they know what they are using. And of course, it's not just users. It's also the creators of these technologies. It's also the organizations that are involved. It's also the behavior of policymakers who are crafting policies and sitting in parliaments. And I'm glad Jingbo, I don't know where she has gone, she's doing quite a great deal of work on educating policymakers so that they can behave well when they are crafting policies that actually are going to govern this. The second issue that we need to do is basically to create incentive schemes. I think Robert Shiller was once asked, can you describe the whole of economics with one word? And that's where I borrowed this concept of incentives. And he says it's in incentives. Incentives describes the whole of economics. Demand, supply, which obviously give you pricing, and you can go on and on. It all boils down to incentives. It's okay to get rules and regulations. If in those rules and regulations there are no inherent incentives, then they are just going to sit on the shelves, and nobody is going to do that. And incentives can be positive, it can also be negative. It can be punitive, it can be a reward. And for me, a punitive incentive is just a negative reward. And mathematically, you can write it as such. And of course, you have a whole field called mechanism design that can teach you on how to design better incentives. And I think when lawmakers and people in positions of responsibilities are actually designing laws and principles to govern this technology, they need to go and learn about mechanism design, almost like reverse game theory. And then the third issue, we need to build institutional structures to regulate this. And for me, institutional structures include labs. It includes the establishment of hubs that deals with the governance of AI, like the one that UNU Macau has just done with Tsinghua University. Some of these institutions will have to be global. The scientific panel on AI that has been established by the General Assembly is another form. And it's actually a constellation of all these institutions. And of course, once you have all governance in all spaces, there is a need to have some form of harmonization. I don't have an answer on how you can harmonize all these things, And of course, this is very important. And I would think even regulations that you put into place, there has to be forums that are going to make sure that whatever has been put into place is taken into account. I am coming to an end now. And then, of course, we need to have policies and regulations. And then we need to have laws. You must have laws that govern all these things. Of course, embedded in the policy and regulation is also the issue of standards, which is quite important. So, coming to the conclusion of this, it is very, very extremely important that we need to govern this technology. It's not an easy thing. It requires policymakers. It requires mathematicians. It requires all of us to come together, and we need to adopt a language that all of us can be able to understand. Because when I bring a lawyer into an AI conference, they say we cannot understand the mathematics. And when we go and meet the lawyers, we cannot understand the legislative framework. And I think the issue of multidisciplinary education becomes even more important. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Marwala. That was very exciting.